Good morning, Derek.
Hey, bud. Welcome, everyone.
How you doing?
Good, right, man.
So Derek hasn't slept in days. He's been chomping through data. I think 71 million, maybe 81 million of us have been scratching our heads, going, how exactly did they do this? Like what happened? And we're getting a lot of clues from a lot of different places. There's a lot of great YouTubers and digital warriors out there who are adding their 2 cents and diving in, but the data is certainly not telling us the story that the media is telling us, right? The media is telling us the story that we told you it was going to be a landslide for Joe Biden, and get ready, and this is going to be massive, and you have a 12-point lead in this state and that state. And as it came down to it, it was a nail biter, and the exit polls were a lie, and the polls were a lie. And now we're told to just accept the results of this election and move on. And even though we heard about Russian interference, completely compromising our election integrity for the last 4 years, we're supposed to, within a week of this highly flawed election, just say, oh, okay, Biden's the new president. Let's move on. Who's his cabinet? Who's congratulated him from around the world? How are we, what are we going to do with all these terrible Trump supporters that enabled this crazy racist president? Move on. There's nothing to see here.
Right.
We beg to differ.
Yeah, and the data begs to differ as well. So I think if we can get into the script and the idea of what we're kind of roll through in the bullet points, that ends up showing kind of what we were led to believe coming in, what happened and transpired day of, and then what's happened since. I think that the data will definitely tell a different story for sure.
So there's two, right? So there's two kind of high level themes. You're gonna do another look at why the exit polls were wrong.
What I'm gonna do on a separate podcast or separate stream is I'm gonna go through the art of the steal, how it all started, where it started from, the steps that went along, the part of the play up until election day, who all was involved, how everybody conspired, and then where we are today, a week after the election, and what is going to transpire.
Right. But the big thematic things that we know we can see just from the Target Smart data, not with the exit polls, are that the urban voter did not reject Trump out of here. I mean, we already heard that we knew he had a meteoric increase in African American voters, Latino American voters. There's been a lot of conversation about what happened to women. Did women break for Trump? Did black women pay for Trump? I mean, we have every intersectionality of these things. So the urban voter did not reject Trump. That's a hypothesis we should be able to prove. And the midnight voter broke heavily for Biden, right? We saw that there was 4 a.m. dumps in all these different, highly contested blue states, and those had a voter propensity that favored Biden, totally different than the daytime, probably the more legal votes that were coming in the polling location.
Correct.
So, as this entire voting system, the system being rigged, is a black box for us, and all we can do is look from the outside in and say, look, some of this stuff doesn't make sense, and anomalies. You can get affidavits from people that are saying, I was told to do this, I was told to do that justify an investigation, but anomalies also justify an investigation, right? So those are things that we want to drive to that, and then we want to get into kind of some of the story, because when you kind of told me your takeaway from the AFL-CIO to the USPS postal workers, I mean, that to me is a story. So let's not.
Yeah, and I'll cover that really in another podcast, because again, that's the thing I want to take into account, that there's a much bigger story at play here. Yeah. And it all plays into Cloward-Piven strategy of just complete overwhelming of the system, and have people going from mean, one day we're focused on all the COVID-19 deaths. The next day we're focused on a riot. The next day we're focused on, the COVID cases are increasing. The next, it's a game to keep you disjointed so that they can go through. It's always look at what my left hand is doing while my right hand is actually the one screwing you, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I can get into that into a lot more detail, separately or whatever. What I think the highlight is for today is that, again, we were told coming into election day that Biden was going to win in a landslide.
Right.
On election day, that proved to be quite a different story and the reverse. And so the media narrative was going to be screwed up. Then the action kicked in that took place after all the vote counters and poll watchers were dismissed and told to go home. Now we are today where we are. And the exit polling that came in if the exit polling is to be believed, Biden won in an absolute landslide. But he didn't win the urban cities that are a key count, right? Which is the Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, Atlanta. So that's the story that they're trying to tell us. And at the end of the day, the way that I see this happening is if and when it does flip. And again, I think you and I both want to go on record that, look, we're Americans. We want a fair fight. In a fair fight, we just want there to be consistency and transparency in the process.
Oh, yeah.
What we're seeing now, again, is like a poker game, right? If you and I are playing poker, eventually we all have to flip our cards over and put our cards on the table, right?
Right.
I can't look at yours and be like, oh, well, guess what? My cards are better than yours, and just pick up the chips and walk away from the table. So if Democrats and the Biden campaign believe that they won, and let's hedge our bets and say that they did win, okay? Right. Wouldn't you want to know that you won fair and square? And if you did, and if there was no cheating involved, then just sit back and relax and say, hey, we know we're going to win. You guys want to make a butt of yourself, then go ahead, right? And so what this data is showing is the reason why the Jake Tappers of the world and the John Lockharts and the Stephanopoulos of the world are saying, hey, dude, just throw in your chips now, get it over with, just concede, whatever, and let's move on, is because they know there was cheating involved. There's too many affidavits, which is a sworn court testimony of people saying, I saw irregularities, some in just the ones or twos, right? Some in the thousands, some in the tens of thousands. So let's just clear the system, right? Even if, again, let's assume that after it's all said and done, and every vote, legal vote, is counted and Biden wins, then all of us would say, okay, we gave it our best shot. Let's now move on. Let's congratulate Biden. Let's move on.
Election is, that's why they had to push the narrative that, this guy's not going to concede.
Correct.
This is not conceding. I mean, a fair election, you're going to see Trump's concede, and you're going to see, you say, okay, put up a good fight. That's why people texting me saying, oh, good game, bud. Let's move on. Let's get along. I'm like, no, I mean, this just doesn't make sense. Let's get to the bottom of it first.
And the Democrats, they haven't conceded 2016 yet. Right. They fought it every single day. So it's quite disingenuous for them to be like, hey guys, just suck it up and get in line. Right. Again, my philosophy on liberal progressives has been for years. They don't demand unity. They command conformity. They want you to conform to their way of thinking, or they will destroy you, which is now we're seeing the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, right? The Jake Tapper saying, hey, if you guys don't concede and you on your Facebook and social media page put up a fight for Trump, future employers are going to be checking that out. He doesn't care about the protesters, their lives, right? Their future employment. Right. But he comes at us, right, and says, oh, if you're going to do this, we're going to attack you. And you have another prominent journalist saying that all you White House staffers that are going to be looking for jobs in the future, we're going to remember this, right? These people want to destroy America. That's my take on it, because they are going to attack you and make sure that you conform to their way of thinking, period, end of story. And if you don't fall in line, your life is over.
Right.
And so, but let's get into it. I know, we don't want to take up everybody's time just talking on, spitballing. So if we want to go into.
Yeah. I mean, one of the key things that you said to me that was really compelling was that even in the places where Trump lost, he grew his vote count.
Correct.
So like you pointed out, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which was going to go blue. This idea that, Biden was getting ex-Trump voters. I mean, of course, the Lincoln Project is kind of designed to this idea that, look, Republicans are hemorrhaging. Even Republicans are jumping ship from Trump. You're going to expect that that Trump's actual vote count decreases in that case, but they did, and the fact that he grew his vote base there needed to be even more fraud to come up with a differential, right?
Correct. And so the easy takeaway, the bullet point takeaway, is the press and the media and the Democrats told us that Trump was hemorrhaging voters, right? All the Trump people were leaving, and they're going to, not all, but a good chunk of them were going to leave. The John Kasichs, the Bill Kristols put together the Republicans for Biden type of thing. And they had a huge Twitter feed, had 300, 400,000 followers, right? The Democrats for Trump was only like 50,000 followers, right? But so the narrative was he's hemorrhaging voters. Biden is just the go-to candidate for calm and law and order or whatever. He's going to restore sensibility, and that independents are going to make the election. Well, if two of those three are true, right? Because Biden, whether you believe he was the consistent candidate and he was going to restore order or not, if Trump was going to hemorrhage his base, and I'll say this: he got 88% of the Republican vote in 2016. So most of these polls were showing he was going to get 76%, 78%. The Rasmussen poll was showing that he was going to equal George H. Bush in 92, when there was Ross Perot took 14 or 15% of the electorate.
Yeah.
So, and then you had independents. He needed to hold independents by about he could get up about 4 to 5 points of independence and still win. Well, the exit polls show that he bled independents sometimes on some where he carried them 8 points in 2016. He may have lost them by 8 this election, right? So that's a 16-point flip. So if he lost independents, the way the map shows, of about 14 points, and he hemorrhaged his base, then this isn't even close. Biden did win in a landslide. He probably won by 10 million votes. He probably won by 8 points. But that's not.
Those were faked.
But exactly. So that's not what we're seeing, right? He's down by about 3 points. So what the narrative ends up showing is that when 10 o'clock came on election night, and for whatever reason, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, and Florida, with large voter counts, counted all their votes, both mail-ins, absentees, and in-person voting that day. Right. They were done, right? We knew who won them, even though the press the media wouldn't call them, because they're again, I'll cover this in another podcast. They have money in the game, right?
Right.
So, but they would quickly call Virginia, which we can show major anomalies in Virginia.
Yeah.
So they were calling the states for Biden to create the narrative that, hey, it's going to be a landslide. So all you people on the West Coast or in Texas, west of Texas, it's over. Just go home. It's done. So, but again, you're showing that on the independent side as well, that they broke for Biden across the board. But if it was a 14-point, again, it's just not even close. So why are we sitting here now down to 15,000 ballots in Georgia and down to 40,000 in Pennsylvania? Because if the exit polls are correct, this thing was over by 9 o'clock on election night, and Biden had it. But they packed up. They told everybody to go home. In the main critical states, we're seeing just clusters right now of impropriety and irregularity. And then all of a sudden at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, they come back and there's just major dumps that skewed way to Biden.
Right. Right. So we said, like, for instance, Wisconsin, with the fact that 80% of the vote would have to go for Biden in these overnight dumps of ballots, when during the daytime, you had a much closer propensity for Trump.
Right.
You said that 1,062,000 voters had already voted going into election day. That's 61% of the 2016 electorate in Wisconsin. And by comparison, seeing that in 2016, Hillary was up 9.2 points Democrats were. So in terms of party registration, they were advanced by 9.2 points, and then Trump won day of. He still won the state by 0.7.
Right. And
then in 2020, by comparison, that was only a 1.2 margin in terms of party registration going in.
Correct.
We end up with a total vote count of 3.2 million.
Correct.
As of election night, however many votes were cast, we had to have such a crazy. We had to have an illegal break for Biden overnight to get to where we are now in Wisconsin.
Correct. And you have that, you can see that show up in Dane County and Milwaukee County. Milwaukee County is the largest county, obviously, in Wisconsin.
Right.
Now, Biden picked up a share. He increased his share by almost 10% over what Hillary took it at. And Trump only increased that by about 6.5%. But Dane County, right, and again, we were told that Milwaukee is going to break heavily for Biden. And that's where a lot of these dumps came. In Dane County, Biden increased his share count or his vote count over Hillary by almost 20%, 19.5%.
That was the 43,000 vote growth.
Yeah, that went from 217,000 to 260,000 votes in Dane County. Trump only grew his by 7,000 votes, and so it's only about a 10.5% increase. But it's the second largest county in Wisconsin, and they turned out 89% of the vote in that county. I mean, that defies logic. I mean, even if you mailed in ballots,
counties have a similar ideology, but they completely diverged in terms of what their behavior was.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so and Dane County has only grown by 50,000 people all decade. And so what this suggests is that, I mean, Dane County just hated Donald Trump. I mean, there was just disdain. I mean, they would go burn down the White House.
That's Madison, University of
Wisconsin.
Madison.
Yeah. So there's the divergence there that it just doesn't prove, it doesn't show anything. And plus, again, Trump grew his vote count in these counties across the board. So, I mean, in Wisconsin alone, and I just picked 17 random counties. Mainly I picked, and in any of these things that I did, whether it be Pennsylvania, Georgia, whatever, I picked obviously the big counties because those are typically, especially in the cities, going to go blue versus the big rural counties or suburban counties to go red. Right. So I just randomly picked 17 counties. So a couple small and then obviously most all the large ones. Trump grew his vote by almost 15%, or I'm sorry, just over 14% in Wisconsin. And he won he won the exact, of these 17, he won the exact same number of counties that he did in 2016. So he won 65% of the counties compared to 35% for Hillary, and same with Biden. And he grew his vote count. So
right. So it's urban voters did not reject Trump.
Correct. And so again, what this also shows in Kenosha, right? In Kenosha, he barely won in 2016, and he grew that margin in 2017. So he grew his vote count in Kenosha, which is where all the headache was, where all that crap happened.
That's where
he grew his vote count by 25%. Biden only got 18%. Then you look at Philadelphia, for example. In Philadelphia, he went and in Philadelphia County, you've got, and Biden still won the county, right? 81 to 18. But Trump grew his share count in Philadelphia County by 17.5%. Biden lost by 1.5% to Hillary. So his vote count, while it went down by 14,000 votes in Philadelphia County, Trump gained 19,000 in Philadelphia County. So again, if the narrative is all this chaos is going to lead these people to the polls, they hate Trump, they want to restore law and order.
Right.
It doesn't show that.
And Bucks County, you said he lost by a wider margin this time in Bucks County, but he grew his vote count.
Yes, and he grew his vote count by more than
throwing ballots.
Correct. So Bucks County went 52% to 47% in this election. For Biden. But Trump grew his vote count by almost 11.6%. Biden grew it by 6.4%.
Where did these votes come from?
Right. And they don't match up with the exit polling as well. And that's what's so interesting about this is that, typically, now granted, it's mail-in ballots, so you don't know, right? So you're getting a kind of a smaller subset, even though they're reaching the same amount of people, 3,500 respondents, 1,700 respondents as they were in 2016. But what you're seeing is those exit polls are all over the place. They don't tell the story that you would think would match up with the early polling, but yet they do. It's you have to go through one by one to understand. We don't have time to do it, but the exit polls tell the story that match up with early polling. At the same time, they diverge from it as well, the narrative. And so something is off. Nothing about this makes sense. I'm not a true mathematician, but I've worked in investment banking for 20 plus years. I look at spreadsheets and numbers all the time. You just start to get to the point where you have to sit back and be like, all right, hold on, this isn't adding up.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the early things that we were doing, just post-election was looking at the Secretary of State websites to
Right.
see the vote counts coming in. And two things are really weird about them. One is that you see a decrement of votes at times, right? It's
Yeah.
like all of a sudden these spreads, like they kind of reset, and they'll pull 200,000 votes off the table for Biden and 500,000 votes off the table for Trump. And
Right.
then they'll keep marching up. And every time they're marching up during the day, you're seeing it usually be whatever the voter propensity is, if it's 51-49 or 52-48 or whatever. But then it's overnight, these things do complete resets in terms of coming back. And then when you have a huge dump, when you have your biggest deltas, it always happens at 4 a.m, and it always happens with like an 80% break for Biden. So those are the things that we hope that the Trump legal team are looking into, to say, okay, why in all these reliably blue states did you have, whatever the propensity was, okay, they're going to break 60-40 for Biden. You saw that during the day, and if there was an overnight reset on the Secretary of State website, it's still broken that same. I mean, you saw a very linear curve. Whereas in every one of these swing states that the AFL, Millie Weaver did a great piece on. Here's how, here's the playbook for election day, and who knows how much earlier before the election it was printed, but it's almost like it tells the future of exactly where there's going to be the greatest, confusion, unrest, and whatnot. And you say, it's really weird that of course we always know what the swing states are going to be, but it played out almost to a T. Right.
And so what Mike's referring to on the union, the AFL-CIO, so the Democrats were having a tough time getting poll watchers and vote counters because of COVID-19, right? They had scared their populace so much of thinking that they're going to drop dead at the bus stop, right? Because of the videos we saw from China, that people were afraid to come out. So what the AFL-CIO did is they said, okay, we'll rally our union workers. They'll go to the polls and work, which is why you see the militant poll workers there standing their ground, because they're roughhousers. They know what to do. They know how to bully people.
Right.
So now they definitely control the poll watchers, because they're all union workers, right? Especially in Detroit and Philadelphia and Milwaukee. And again, going back to just highlight the difference in the cities, Cuyahoga County is a massive blue county, right? Biden in Cuyahoga.
What city is that in Ohio?
That's Cleveland.
That's Cleveland, Ohio. Okay.
So Biden only grew Hillary's share by 1% by 4,000 votes. He got 4,000 more votes in Cuyahoga County than Hillary got. Meanwhile, Trump increased that by 11,000, right? So he increased it by 6%. So again, Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland, didn't show up for Biden. So what you're seeing, and he grew his Ohio count share by 8.25%. Biden grew it by just under 10, but he got stomped in Ohio by a larger margin than he beat Hillary, right? So again, these numbers don't add up. Going back to Philadelphia real quick, the urban Philadelphia, according to the exit polls, Trump won 15% of the urban Philadelphia in 2016. He won 18% this time. Biden lost 2 points, 83 down to 81. So again, the narrative of Philadelphia and Philly suburbs just don't add up. The Philly suburbs did go, Trump lost a point and Biden picked up 3, but it doesn't count. It just doesn't hold up anymore, their urban push. But what they did was, and I'll go into this in another podcast, is if you look at the cities where the racial unrest was, that's where we're having all of our irregularities, right? Milwaukee, Kenosha area, right? Kenosha is an outward suburb of Milwaukee. Then you had Philadelphia and Atlanta, and you're seeing so many irregularities there. I'll go into the Mark Zuckerberg and the CTCL, $350 million he poured in to drive voter counts up or whatever for Philadelphia and Atlanta in particular.
Right.
But yeah, so anyway, that the narrative still just doesn't hold up with these inner cities are going to break heavily for Biden, for whatever the narratives were in the media.
So the U.S. Okay, so the story. One interesting thing about creating these riots, having these BLM riots in these key cities, is you're very easily and quickly identifying through the organization of that process people who are willing to, they want change. They want change through force. They probably have an appetite for legal infraction, right? They're not worried about misdemeanors and or felonies. They're willing to risk their futures by throwing a chair through a plate glass window.
Right.
You identify those people. Now you all of a sudden have you either
committed poll watchers.
Yeah, you're recruiting poll watchers. You're identifying people who can be collecting ballots. I mean, this could all be happening while the violence is happening. Some of the states required you to request a mail-in ballot because of COVID, but in a lot of states they were just proactively sending out tons of ballots. And we've seen the videos of postal workers who are like, I can get you a few ballots. Let's see. Right.
Yeah. Right. And you're having sworn affidavits of them saying that my supervisor or whatever backdated ballots, had me collect them, wanted me to backdate, whatever. Right. So you're seeing those in courts in Pennsylvania and Michigan, and I think Nevada now. So, but yeah, so you had all of that chaos going on to where they knew, if you think about the GoFundMe's for bailing these people out of prison that did all the riots or whatever, right, and covering their legal expenses, these DAs let them go. Well, guess what they have now? They have a list. So-and-so, did this or whatever riot. Now we can target them and say, hey, you want to earn $100 to go, watch a poll for us for the day or whatever. So it's a recruitment tool, and that's what they were doing. They were recruiting. Right. Again, we don't have evidence of that. We can't go and say, hey, so-and-so was arrested on whatever day, and then he was paid $100 by the AFL-CIO. But in that AFL-CIO,
they skipped the blue hairs. They had
in that AFL-CIO document, it lays out the playbook for how to work a poll, what to do, basically how to cheat, right? So I mean, it's a strong arm tactic that they use in getting and rallying people to their cause to work the polls. Now, again, going on the early polling, the takeaways are the early polling was just off, right? And so what's the early polling? Why were they so far off, right? We learned in 2016 the polls. Right, exactly. We learned in 2016 that the polls were terrible. So why did they fall for the same gambit again this time? Well, because it's suppression of vote. If I'm a Wisconsin voter and you put out a poll and Trump is down 17 points, and I'm I'm a blue hair, I'm an older person, or I'm a lower middle class person, and I want to contribute because I want to be part of this because I think that Trump is getting robbed. Am I going to go put $10 into a campaign? No, it's a losing bet, right? If I know that you're holding 4 aces, right, and I got 3 threes and a couple of other cards, I'm not going to go all in, right? I'm not going to contribute any more money, right? I fold. So
and I might not even vote because I might be okay, if it's that kind of spread, let's move to Biden.
Correct. So Quinnipiac, which is a normal, I've used them in the past of saying, hey, Quinnipiac has so and so up by 1 or 2. It's probably legit. They were off by 8 points this election. Yeah. Wall Street Journal 7 points. Fox News, which liberals love to hate, they were off by 5 points. So Rasmussen was about 2.1, and The Hill was actually the closest. Them and Investors Business Daily was at 0.9.
And Trafalgar?
So, I didn't do battleground states, but Trafalgar got, I think Politico said that they were the most accurate this election cycle as well in the battleground states.
Right. But Nate Silver said every poll underfavored Trump. He went through yesterday. He put every single poll on what the answer was.
Right.
So
I mean, Ohio, right? The polling showed Trump was a +1. He won 8 by 8. Let's see, what's another one? Pennsylvania was 1.2 average. Biden right now is up by 0.6. Trump, Texas, 1.3. He won by 6. Biden, they were saying, was average of almost 7 points. He won by 0.7. So and Biden was up in Florida by 0.9. He's going to lose it by 3.5. So yeah, it's a push poll. What they're trying to do is create the narrative, and so that way, if Trump does win, they can say, "Hey, these polls, there's no way Trump stole the election." Right? They were setting up their narrative already to one, suppress the vote. But if he did win, they had their fallback. Now, going back to what I was saying about the inner city, if you look, if you sit back and put the piece of the puzzle together, and I wish I had a Glenn Beck chalkboard so you could put link all this stuff together. If you sit back and look at the cities by which they created all the racial divide, and by which those cities didn't break the way that the Democrats hoped they would, or thought they would, or at least told everybody it was going to break. Now, what are they doing? They're setting up that if these states get flipped back to Trump, now they have someone to blame. It's because the black voter and the minority voter didn't show up to the polls to rid us of this racist. So now it's your fault. right? Because they can't say that the narrative, first of all, by the Democrats for 4 years is that we got to break down the white patriarchal household, right? We got to tear down the patriarchy. Well, guess what? White men broke 11 points. Trump still won them by 1 point, but white men broke 11 points to Biden from 2016. So are we still going to talk about white patriarchal?
But that's exit polls.
Correct. And that, again, we have to assume that in some of these exit polls that they're correct, right? But white women who we were told were bleeding, Trump was bleeding, they actually ended up voting for Trump, right? Biden still won their overall vote, but point swung to Trump,
right?
In that part for white women.
Right.
Black women, surprisingly, black women broke heavily for Trump compared to 2016.
Right.
Because again, and that's what you saw a lot of these Candace Owens or whoever, in the minority and African American communities were saying, we want peace, we want safety, we want our kids to be protected when they're walking home from school.
Right.
So it was interesting to see that does seem to have been the case. They did seem in the urban areas to break towards Donald Trump, and in that law and order message held. Right. So.
Okay, so you get the poll workers to be, SEIU, AFL, CIO, union workers. You get the USPS. You start this narrative that there's going to be a massive number of, there's going to be so much mail that we're going to have to get more money to these guys.
Right.
Reality, like you said, it's 280 million pieces of mail per day.
Right.
That go around, and here we are. Obviously, there's only going to be 150 million ballots if you're playing it right. So how is this delta over a period of a month really going to tax? I mean, it certainly couldn't rise to the level of Christmas and Christmas cards.
Correct.
I mean, that story so that the USPS can in some ways find. I don't know. Could it be that corrupted, this institution?
Yes, it is. So Mother's Day is the most heavily mailed day, right, in the country every year.
Okay.
You never hear of, hey, we got to prepare for 150 million letters being sent out on top of the 280 million letters, or pieces of mail that go out every day.
Right.
So what was the push for? Hey, we have to fund the post office more money, right? We got to make sure that these systems are updated or whatever. The money was being used, again, just stepping back and using common sense. It was used to pay off these supervisors where they could go in and say, hey, supervisor at so-and-so branch, we need you. So pick your trusted postal workers that can collect ballots or destroy ballots, whatever it may be. And, that's how we'll control, like Newman and Seinfeld, right? He who controls the mail controls information. So if you have that aspect of it and you have the AFL-CIO working the poll counts, then you have you have the most corrupt organization in the country, well, other than our government, but the most corrupt organization in the country being the union labor bosses that are basically mafia bosses, right? Driving that narrative, driving that chariot. Then you have the Postal Service getting money on top of, and again, keep in mind the U.S. Postal Service Union endorsed Joe Biden. If you're wanting to maintain a level of impartiality, you don't endorse anybody. So now you're endorsing the guy that you want to win. Yeah. Just so happens that the mail that seems to be being found in trash cans and stuff like that are in postal boxes were Trump votes. So right. Again, and another thing we want to say that, look, if it's one irregularity, right? If there ends up being just somewhere in the country 100 ballots that went for Trump that were found in a ditch somewhere, okay, 100 votes isn't going to swing an election. But right. Why does every single error go one way?
Sure.
So again, and I'll get into Benford's law,
both from scorecard and from these mail-in ballots.
Right, the ballot dump. So, and I'll get into Benford's law in my podcast. But Benford's law is basically the law of the first digit, and the law of the first digit indicates that numbers that come in, go to a newspaper, especially like the Financial Times. There's a lot of numbers. Or Wall Street Journal, just pick numbers and write down the first digit, right? 30% of the time that first digit is going to be a 1, then it scales down to 17 to 12 or whatever. Well, in looking at the Benford's law and based on these data dumps, Joe Biden in these data dumps, I can't remember which state it was, but for the possibility of his data dumps to be considered a possibility was a 0.000017% chance. So in other words, it is statistically impossible for the ballot counts that came in for Biden to happen, whereas the Trump ballots were at 53%. So it more or less followed the curve. And I've got Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Chicago for purposes of whatever that can show the graph. And the graphs just don't support that these things were done completely randomly, right, from the voter, right, the person that just sent in their ballots, whatever. It was shown that it was manipulated. And Benford's law, it does that in excellent fashion in times like this.
One of the things you had said to me about that Steve Deace had said on the 2nd of November was that on the day of the election in Pennsylvania, 60% of Republicans hadn't voted yet, but 40% of whereas only 40% of Democrats hadn't voted yet. So, obviously they already had the kind of law fiasco where they were talking about what is it going to take to extend the voting deadlines November 6th, and that was a dispute with the courts,
right?
But talk about because Pennsylvania is the keystone, right?
Yeah,
the keystone state, and it's very possible that I mean, our instinct is at this point, either on process or fraud, Pennsylvania is going to flip back for Trump.
Correct.
The real clear politics already pulled it off their board.
Right.
So they already discounted Biden's vote count by those 20.
Right. So in Pennsylvania, this is we're using Steve Deace used Target Smart Data, which is a Democrat data collection firm. So because he on the day before the election, if you can find his show on Blaze, he started from the premise of saying, what's my worst case scenario? So I'm going to use the Democrats numbers gathering. So I'm going to start from there. So he walked through the 10 battleground states that we were expecting to happen, which 7 of them ended up being, the most contested. That what he showed was that in Pennsylvania, Democrats had a 32-point edge going into Election Day.
Right.
GOP was, in all fairness, the GOP was up 8 going into 2016. Trump won it by 0.7.
Right.
But in this instance, there was only 40% of the electorate had voted. So they were projecting that more than 10 times more early votes had already occurred. So that cannibalizes the Democrat vote. If you're up by 32 points, then most of those are the heavy Democrat leaning areas.
Right.
So if that is to hold, then you wouldn't have seen where he's getting trounced on Election Day, where he's up 800,000 points. I think at one time he was up by almost 10 points total, right? So what you had then is you had to have, this just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You had to have all of those other absentee ballots they were claiming come in late, right? They came in late, had to break heavily for Biden. Well, wouldn't you know it? They broke by almost 60 points, 80-20. So if you're in a state where it's going to end up right now being 50-49 roughly, right, and may not even be maybe 49.5, 49.5, it's statistically impossible. If you're taking absentee ballots from around the state and they're making up absentee ballots, listen to Richard Barris on Thursday or Friday morning, this past Friday, and Steve Bannon asked him, he said, hey, how's Pennsylvania looking? He was like, well, we were told yesterday at the end of the day, the news services were all told there were 450,000 outstanding absentee ballots. And Barris goes, wouldn't you know, this morning, our bad, it's 750,000. Right. You know how many absentee ballots you have because you know how many requests came in and you know how many you sent out. So you don't just randomly make up numbers. You don't just all of a sudden find 300,000.
Well, that's what we said during that, that's what I said, categories of election fraud. Our last stream, that was the whole thing, is like, typically you say, look, how many are we waiting on?
Correct.
And you're giving yourself runway to cheat when you say, and the press should have repudiated that immediately. They should have said, hold on a second, 750 versus 450.
Right.
You can't just keep printing ballots and posting ballots here.
Right. And then, and so anyway, so he had to win 60 points, right? He ends up winning more than that, right, to swing the election in Pennsylvania. Because again, they were just finding ballots. And on this guy, Cultural Husbandry on Twitter, when he pulled the Edison data from New York Times, he has a source at the New York Times that pulled that data for him. He's a data scientist. He went through and put it all and plotted it all on a graph. you can clearly see that Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan and Georgia are 100% rigged. I mean, he essentially says one anomaly doesn't indicate fraud, right? A series of anomalies is fraud, and especially if they don't fall along Benford's law as well. So, well, hold on, but you and I go back and or not go back and forth. We talk. To me, the Trump campaign is convicting and prosecuting this thing completely wrong, right? They're going out and trying to say, well, hey, we found a bunch of dead voters that voted. That's not going to swing an election. And you're not going to find 130,000 dead voters in Michigan that voted. You may find 5,000, right? But you're not going to find 130,000. So what they need to do is they need to find a data scientist that can go through and say, none of this makes sense. Benford's law, it has been used and is used in federal and state and criminal courts of law as a DNA. It is the DNA of math, right? The DNA of statistics. And so if you can plot out and show this doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and using the internal poll or the polling that was done before, the internal polling, and where all this stuff is coming in, you can easily create a narrative and cast doubt on the fraud that didn't occur, right? So,
what do you think it would be helpful to you? So this is a big question. Is first of all, we know this is not the first election that was stolen,
correct?
Right? So the question is, would it be somewhat unifying to the country if at the end of the day, when they find out that the scorecard program was used to flip symmetrical votes, columns, we talked about that in the last podcast,
Yeah.
or the mail-in ballot system was used to fabricate votes for Biden over Bernie.
Correct. Yeah.
If these tools were used to steal the nomination from Bernie Sanders, could that be a way of deafening the blow downstream as we identify, look, clearly our entire election integrity is defunct.
Right.
Let's figure out how we have to do this in the future. But will that create some sort of unity around this narrative? I mean, it ain't over, right? We know it ain't over, and we know the categories of fraud.
Right.
We just need them to investigate each of these categories, and then are there audits that can be done not only on this election but back on Super Tuesday? Because as you recall, Super Tuesday happened, and on the heels of Super Tuesday, shutdown. Boom, boom. It was like, I mean, the American people that don't realize that the results here, you are dealing with a system that's like, everybody shut up. Here's how we're doing this. Here are the chess pieces we're moving to make it happen.
Right.
And we all think we're free thinkers and moving along here. This was used to steal the real fervor on the other side of the aisle was with Bernie Sanders.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And they knew they could not win with a socialist at the top of the ticket.
Right.
So they put a radical militant socialist on the second part of the ticket, right? The under ticket being the vice president.
Right.
But that, again, it goes into show as well that if there was going to be this huge blue wave, which everybody was showing, and the state polls are showing whatever going into the election or whatever as well, then why is the House going to go red by +10? It looks like we picked up state houses. We just took 57 seats in New Hampshire, right? House seats in New Hampshire flipped back to Republicans. Yet he lost the state of New Hampshire. I mean, again, if these people are going, right, are they going to go vote for some conservative in their district but not vote for Trump? And then you're seeing too in the elections we went through last night that in these Senate races, the numbers aren't matching up, right? I mean, Trump was outperformed by some senators barely, right, in 2016 by 0.03%. Yet Ossoff is underperforming Biden here in Georgia by 4%, right? Peters, they of course, because again the same rig count, right? Peters closed it. He was down. I mean, Trump and James are on top of each other.
Yeah,
there's a 6,000 vote difference, right? Peters was way back, and all of a sudden here comes Peters charging back, right? It's like, so now you're telling me that people weren't voting for Biden, but were all of a sudden voting for Peters, right? Otherwise, you'd have seen the count continue to stay the same, right? There's a consistency to it.
Well, Derek, when you have to come up with 100,000 ballots overnight,
right,
it takes a lot more time to fill in so many bubbles.
Right.
You got one bubble to fill in, you go Biden.
Right. Quickly, yeah.
That's what you have to do. That's how you have to do it. I mean, you only have till 4 a.m.
Right. And so again, it for those people who say, because the responses you and I have both gotten, right? Well, if it was rigged just for Biden, then why didn't they go down ticket? Well, because they couldn't. They didn't have time. You can't. In a lot of states now, you can't just vote straight ticket. You used to be able to, right? In some states you can, but otherwise you have to go through and fill in these ballots quickly. Then you saw the 158,000, 138,000 dump in Detroit that all went 100% for Biden. That is statistically impossible. What it also is impossible is there were no errors, right? I mean, people. So we learned so much that in Palm Beach County, Florida, right, the most elite of the elite, right, the richest and most educated, they can't punch a ballot right at the time, and so we have to hold it for 37 days to figure that one out. But for some reason now, everybody is so smart that they know how to fill out every ballot perfectly. Every election, you have 2 to 3% of ballots that are thrown out.
They get rejected.
They get rejected. We've had 100%. You haven't heard anything about the rejection rate, right? 100% of the ballots are coming through. 100% are going in. That is statistically impossible. So once you start lining up these statistics, and it shows and it creates that narrative, is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? Not a chance.
All right. So, and you have a lot more data. You're going to do another stream, a little bit later, because you want to go state by state, even some of the states that are not contested. You have some insights on some of that.
Because I want to
data. For the most part, we've been talking through Target Smart data here. If it wasn't Secretary of State data, I should also note, I think I noted before, we tweeted it out, is that a number of the Wayback Machine snapshots have been removed.
Correct. In Michigan in particular.
So, because we were looking at that, we were seeing that concurrency of the John James vote with the Trump vote. We said, how do all of a sudden they skew out overnight? Right. All right.
Yeah. And then you had, what was it? Looking at this Edison software, all of a sudden you had a 300,000 drop in votes, in total votes. All of a sudden you had a 300,000 drop at 2:14 in the morning in Pennsylvania. Then it picks back up. All of a sudden it spikes 500,000. Two or three entries later, it drops another 500,000. I mean, they were manipulating the system so badly, right? These should all consistently show growth for both candidates. And you're not seeing that, man. You're seeing some very, very abnormal stuff going on in these vote tallies that were being put into the system. And so, as we noticed that night, right, CNN and NPR and New York Times was showing, Biden leading or whatever by someone, whatever the next morning, Biden was leading in Michigan, but the Secretary of State office was still showing that Trump was up 275,000. So why was the data different at the Secretary of State's office? They're the ones that have to certify those votes before they get sent. So why aren't they showing the same data that CNN and NPR and all them were doing? Well, because what did the media have to do? They had to push the narrative. Right. So now if they control the narrative, they can get into your head that, hey, Trump or Biden won Michigan and he's up by 100 and something thousand. It doesn't matter what the Secretary of State's office shows, even though they're the ones that have to certify the results. Trump was still up 279,000 on their website when the media was showing that Michigan had already gone to Biden by 120,000 votes.
But that's exactly the reason why. I mean, people know that we are the news now. The distrust in the media is so huge that people were going directly to the Secretary of State website and looking at this stuff. And that's why everybody's been scratching their head since the night of the 3rd to the 4th.
Right. And that's what Steve Deace shows too. If you watch his overtime show yesterday, he goes into the shenanigans. And his takeaway at the end was, where they messed up is we have a paper trail.
Right.
Right. If it had just been, let's somehow figure out how to create people that are at a voting machine and the voting machines go straight to the computer system, then we can control through scorecard and hammer. And I would encourage everyone. I did a scorecard and hammer podcast the day before the election when McInerney had kind of come out that weekend and sounded the bell and show how it's done. And that's what Mike was alluding to earlier as well, that's how they tested it during the primaries to steer votes away from Bernie Sanders to Biden so that he would win, because he was going into some states where Biden was losing. He was behind Bernie in the polls, barely, but he was behind. So it was a way for him to shave off those votes. So I'd encourage you to go look at that. And then Mike did a podcast as well yesterday, or the day before, that kind of rolled through
all the categories of election fraud.
Yeah, and just how we, as an American people, want to make sure that we have free and fair elections going forward, because what we're living through right now, and again, like we said on caveat, when all the legal votes are counted, if Biden wins, Trump supporter, look, we haven't rioted at this point, right? And we know, and what we don't know, we have a very good, using common sense, we sense that it was stolen, right?
Right.
That it was a rigged election, but we're not rioting now. So if all of a sudden it comes through that there are legitimate votes and all the legitimate votes counted go to Biden and show Biden wins, then okay, then America chose to go down this rat. And you're already seeing some people come out and say, wait a minute, if I'd have known that Biden was going to be for this mandatory lockdown and mandatory mask thing, I wouldn't have voted for him. It's like, dude, that shows you're a low information voter. He told you that.
Intelligent people.
Yeah, very intelligent people.
So good. Let's just give props out to obviously Millie Weaver's doing some great stuff. Steve Dace.
Right.
Everybody has to check out Steve Bannon's War Room. I mean,
Steve Bannon's War Room.
He's got People's Pundit on there all the time, and
Richard Barris of People's Pundit, who is a nonpartisan as the day is long.
Although he is incensed right now.
Oh, because he knows. I mean, again, he can't come out because he doesn't have the actual evidence to hold it. See, whatever. This is the problem we face, right? The media is doing so that we've gone from there's no fraud to there's no widespread fraud to now there's no systemic fraud, right? So basically, you're admitting now there's fraud.
Election, right?
Yeah. So there's fraud going on, but now you're switching your narrative. So, and when you have these lawsuits that are about to happen, that's why RCP took Pennsylvania off the map, because now they're saying, look, you defied Alito's order. Alito's order was specific. You go ahead and count those votes, but separate those ballots. And Pennsylvania said, no, the poll election workers said, we're just going to blend them all together. So now we don't know, right, which votes were counted that came in after, or provisional ballots that were counted after he said at 8 o'clock, you got to stop. So guess what that's going to end up doing? The constitutional push will be, you have to invalidate all those votes, because now you just mucked up the system so bad that now starting at 8 p.m., every vote counted after that or every ballot came in after that has to be thrown out. Now he ends up winning Pennsylvania back by probably 600,000 or 700,000 votes. And same with Michigan. Same's going to happen in Michigan, I think, as well. So just from reading through the Pennsylvania court case that was filed yesterday, if you read through there and see what they're attacking, that's what they should be, or that's what they're going after, is these large irregularities where they defied the state legislatures. Because everyone believes that the media tells you who's the president, right? That's not how it works. The state legislatures do. If the state legislatures have a law that say the ballots have to be in by a specific day, the court can't overrule that.
Right.
The state has to go and you have to challenge the law. You have to say why the law is illegal. And that's not what the Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did. That's why the Commonwealth Court ruled in the Republicans' favor. And again, if you're not cheating, then you say, fine, okay, you want poll watchers in, let's have them in then. So the Commonwealth on Friday or Saturday, I think it was Saturday, said, stop the count, right? And stop the count until Republicans can get in and watch what you're doing. What do the Democrats do? They just said, well, fine, we're not going to count anymore then. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, why? So then they immediately petitioned the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in a 5-2 ruling, because there are five Democrats, ruled in favor of the Democrats. So what do? Didn't allow the Republican people in, and they kept counting the votes. And we kept watching Biden gain and take over. So and so the legislatures
coup,
the what?
This is a flat out coup.
Yeah, it's a coup, and it's
a coordinated coup. And I think we can argue social policies all day long, but we have to agree that, look, if you're going to be a Democrat and you think that this country needs to be united under this new Biden presidency, you cannot have all the foundation of that be this fraudulent election.
Well, because it's built on sand, right? And a structure built on sand will not stand; it'll fall. So that's what we need to get to. And so we need to challenge this. We need to let it play out. And yes, don't get us wrong, we're on the Trump side, right? But we're also on the side of America and fairness. And again, if at the end of the day, if the Supreme Court, we put a lot of faith in, right, if they come through and say these votes should count and they go to Biden, then we have to live with that, right? We can be angry at the Supreme Court and say, you guys, must have been bought off or whatever as well. We can make that argument, quote unquote, but we will accept those results, right? And then go and battle in 2022, assuming there's a free and fair election, to swing it back in 2022. But what we're seeing right now is it's statistically impossible to have occurred what occurred. It's also statistically impossible for Trump or for the GOP to pick up state legislative houses, swing key swing states in House, right, and pick up 10 or 12 votes, 10 or 12 seats, and for all these exit polls and exit polls and entry polls to have been correct. All three of those cannot be true, right? So you have to then just start looking at common sense. That's why I say, again, I wish I had a chalkboard where you could start connecting these things, because it makes it easier to follow along. Because there's so much confusion.
I'm getting you a chalkboard.
Okay.
All right, signing off. We are signing off. You're gonna bounce through. You got a great deck that you're gonna go through state by state later.
Yeah. I'll probably end up doing it tomorrow. Just I'm still gathering a lot of key information or whatever, and pulling some stuff together. But it'll definitely come out this week for sure.
All right, everybody who's watching, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing our stuff. We're just a couple concerned citizens just like you. So let's get the word out. Let's keep the faith, and let's see what exactly happened here.
Right. Democracy dies in darkness. That's what the Washington Post has as their slogan, right? And what happened on election night was something changed in the middle of the night. So democracy may have died in darkness. So we want to save that.
All right, guys. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for checking out America's New Clothes.
Thank you.